Handheld gaming is probably my favourite way to actually play games. Now, sure, whenever I boot up the PS5 and I'm playing the latest next generation game, I'm always blown away by the graphics and the load times and the things they can do. But I do always tend to find myself coming back to something handheld. And this isn't really actually out of the house, it mainly is me just playing on the sofa next to my partner while she watches telly. So because of this, the Nintendo Switch and recently the Steam Deck have become my main way to play games recently. Now, because they're the main two options in that handheld gaming space, they inevitably do draw comparison. So while I don't think that these two devices are competing with each other, I do think they go after different sections of the market. I do think that if you have neither, or if you've got one and you're considering the other, then, there are some things that are worth thinking about. Today I'm going to go a few different comparisons and some pros and cons of each one, and we're going to talk about some use cases and why I think you might want one over the other. Hello and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having a good day. So we're going to jump straight in talking about the builds of the different devices. Straight away, if you put each one side by side, you can immediately tell that the Steam Deck is a much bigger device. This means it feels completely different in the hand. It does have those grips on the back of it, whereas the Switch doesn't have those grips. And generally, I kind of think that the Steam Deck is more comfortable to hold, especially if you have bigger hands and if you're going to be playing for a longer gaming session. The Steam Deck also has different control options. So it's got capacitive touch, it's got trackpads, the buttons are in different places, it has an actual D-pad as opposed to just sort of like individual D-pad buttons that the Switch has. It's got back buttons as well. The choice of how you want to play on a Steam Deck with using the various different controllers and button mapping set up in the Steam community, there's a wider choice there, I think, for sure. And then I also think that the audio sounds slightly better on the Steam Deck. I think that's due to, it just being a bigger device. There are better speakers they're able to fit in there. It's not a huge difference, but it does sound a bit different. On the other hand, the Nintendo Switch, it's a much sleeker device. It looks better, it looks more exciting. If you're changing up your Joy-Con options, then you've got all sorts of different customization options there. The Steam Deck is very static, you could put a skin on it, but in terms of the actual unit, it's all one unit, you can't interchange things, no customization there. The Switch isn't super comfortable to hold, I've found, and actually when I use mine I've put a grip on it to sort of like give me those extendable areas to hold it. But then the Switch, particularly the Switch OLED, I think the Switch OLED has a nicer screen than the Steam Deck. It's a little bit smaller, but the colours on the OLED really do shine when you compare it to a Steam Deck screen. That OLED screen really does make a difference. To me, if I'm being completely honest, I don't actually think that either of these devices are really that portable. The Steam Deck is massive. I know it is marketed as being a portable device and you could carry it around with you if you wanted to. And the same with the Switch as well. The Switch is smaller, but the Switch feels more fragile, especially with the Joy-Cons on the side. You kind of feel like if you were to drop it and it was to hit on the side of the Joy-Con, then those Joy-Cons are going to snap right off. Like I said, I don't really think either of them are portable devices. It's certainly not portable devices when you compare them to previous Nintendo devices, things like the 3DS, the Game Boy even, or Sony's PlayStation Portable or the Vita or something like that. Those are much more portable devices, I think. You can put them in your pocket and you're not too worried about them. I don't really think that the Steam Deck or the Switch are super portable, except for perhaps the Switch Lite, especially if you get one of those clamshell cases, then that feels more like you could just put it in your pocket. You'd have a big pocket, but you could just put it in your pocket and take it around with you everywhere you go. Steam Deck and Switch, they are portable, but they're not take everywhere you go kind of devices. So if you're looking for something that you could take everywhere you go, then you might want to consider a Switch Lite. Internally then, there's really no denying that the Steam Deck is more powerful. Now, I'm not saying that this means the Steam Deck is going to run everything perfectly or run everything better than the Switch, because that's not true. But in terms of raw hardware, the Steam Deck is more powerful. And this does let you play a wider variety of games on the whole, and we'll come to that later. And what about battery life? Well, the Steam Deck has been quoted to get you between 2 to 8 hours of battery life. Now, this is a huge range, and actually I think it's kind of a bit misleading. And the reason I think it's misleading is because I think it really depends on what type of gamer you are and what type of games you play. If you're thinking of buying the Steam Deck to run the latest AAA games on it all the time, things like Elden Ring, God of War, Spider-Man, those kinds of games, you are never going to get 8 hours of battery life. Games like that, sometimes you don't even get 2 hours of battery life. I can play Elden Ring, 30 FPS, sort of like medium to high settings, and I'm amazed it runs, I really am, but you really don't get much battery life at all. I would say you might not even reach 2 hours battery life from full, maybe like an hour and a half, something like that. On the other hand, if you play very small indie games, things like, I don't know, something like Stardew Valley or something like Rogue Legacy 2, games that really don't take up much power, then you're going to get way more battery life. 4, 5, 6 hours, things like that. I've never personally played a game where it's estimated I will get 8 hours of battery life. I'm not really sure what kind of game that would be. Maybe that's just if you just browse the Steam store for 8 hours, you would get that full length of battery. I've never got 8 hours. I would say 1.5 to 5 or 6 hours is probably a better range personally from my experience, and it really does depend on the type of game you play. Heavier games, you're more towards that 1.5. Lighter games, you're more towards that 5 or 6. The Switch OLED, on the other hand, Nintendo quote 4.5 to 9 hours, and that's a bit more reasonable, I think. Even playing the biggest Switch games, because they sort of have to work those around the Switch's internal hardware, you are going to get better battery life from it than from a Steam Deck. So playing Breath of the Wild, something like that, you're still going to get more hours, 4.5 usually, compared to playing a big game on the Steam Deck where you'd only get 1.5 to 2. So I kind of think the Switch does have a better battery life, but at the expense of that power. You know, you can't run the latest games incredibly well. Okay, so we're going to move on to the games, and honestly, I think the games are the main reason why you're going to pick one of these systems over the other. Do you care about Switch exclusives, or do you care more about PC games? On the one hand, the Steam Deck has a massive library. The Steam library is incredibly big. Sure, you can't run all of the games on the Steam Deck, but in terms of pure numbers, you can play more games on the Steam Deck, 100%. On the other hand, the Switch, it's still got a big library. You know, don't get me wrong, it's a big library. It's not as big as the Steam store, but then on the other hand, you get those Switch exclusives. You get things like Pokemon, you get things like Mario, Splatoon, Fire Emblem. Those games are huge system sellers. Those are the kind of games that people want to play. And if that's you and you are getting into Nintendo games, then you're not going to be able to get them on the Steam Deck. And so Switch might be the way to go. On the other hand, if those games that I've listed and other Nintendo exclusives, things like Metroid, things like Xenoblade, if you don't really care about those, then you know, maybe the Switch isn't the way to go for you. Maybe the Steam Deck would be better because it does have a wider variety of games. And this is even before we start talking about emulation. You know, the Steam Deck is capable of emulating basically any older console. Some say it can even emulate the Switch, but I think that's sort of like, that's not really always the case. I think you're going to struggle with that. But especially older systems, PlayStation 2, the DS, Game Boy, SNES, things like that, those are very emulatable. So if you are sort of in that mindset to get an emulator working, get some ROMs, you're going to increase that library even more. So I definitely think it's worth thinking about what kind of games you want to play before you make the decision of which console you want to get, because you might end up accidentally locking yourself out of something you might want to play. So we're going to touch on cost now quickly, and I think this one can be misleading, to be honest. So when you're comparing just the cost of the consoles, you're going to see that the lower end of things are kind of comparable. The 64GB Steam Deck is a bit more comparable to the Switch OLED. The Steam Deck is still more expensive than the Switch OLED is, but the thing is that it's hard to recommend just getting that 64GB Steam Deck model. Even people who play like the smallest games, you probably want to be on that 256GB model, or you want to be buying a 64GB model and an SD card at the same time. So that initial cost up front there on the Steam Deck is definitely higher, and I think it can be misleadingly higher. But on the other hand, I don't think you can compare these purely on the cost of the console. I think you also have to include the cost of the games as well. You have to keep that in mind anyway. And typically, in my opinion, it's going to be cheaper for you to get games on the Steam Deck than it is on the Nintendo Switch. Now, both have sales, but Nintendo's exclusive games, if that's what you're after, they don't go very cheap and they don't go on sale for very long or very often either. So usually you're probably going to be paying something like, in the UK, something like £50 for each of the Nintendo exclusive games. Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, the newer games like Fire Emblem Engage is coming out probably around about the time when you're watching this. Those games, they're going to cost the full £50. Whereas on the Steam Deck, not only are games a little bit cheaper anyway, because PC games do tend to be a little bit cheaper, but also Steam has so many sales and so many good sales normally as well. Things go on sale for pretty good reductions, something like 75% off sometimes, even more than that. So I think that while upfront, the cost of the Steam Deck is more for the device, I think then when you're comparing games, again, that cost model kind of changes because you can spend less on games. And especially if you are somebody who's buying the Steam Deck for emulation and you've already got all your ROMs and things like that, then there's not really any extra cost for the games there for those games anyway. And so that means in that area the Steam Deck will be cheaper, but yeah, like I said, upfront cost will be more. Okay, so those were the main areas that I think were worth talking about. They're kind of the broader strokes of comparing each device. There's a couple of other points that I wanted to include that don't really fit into either of those, but I still think are worth considering. Some of them are really worth considering. The first one is the setup of the system. So the Nintendo Switch is so easy to set up. You get the device, you boot it up, you just make an account, you pick a game, you download it, and you play it. Or, you know, you probably get it with a bundle. You can buy the Switch OLED with, say, a physical copy of Mario Kart. That's a very often deal that goes around. You just put the cartridge in, it sets up, and you're playing right away. The Steam Deck doesn't quite work the same as that. You make a Steam account, then you have to go into the Steam store, you've got to pick a game that you know will work, and usually with the games that Steam recommends for the Steam Deck, it will run right away. But because it is a PC and not a console, sometimes there is a little bit of tweaking to do, changing your control scheme if you want. And on some games that are not the, fully supported Steam Deck games, there might be settings, tweakings to do, and different ways that you need to change to actually run a game. You don't really have that on the Switch, so while the Steam Deck library is bigger, in order to fully access that big library, you probably will have to go further into getting to grips with the system, whereas the Switch OLED is very much pick up and play right away. So if you're kind of person that really doesn't care for going around messing with settings, tweaking things around, then maybe the Switch will work better for you. If you're somebody who is interested in that kind of thing, messing around with settings and getting the most you can out of your device, then the Steam Deck could be more of interest to you. Similarly, those physical games that I mentioned before, you can have a whole physical collection on the Switch. You can't really get physical PC games these days, so it is all digital if that matters to you. Moving on then, are you a PC gamer already? Do you already have a Steam library of 50, 100, 200, 500 games? Some people have Steam libraries of over 1,000 games. If so, then that could also change your decision on which one you want to buy because, well, in two different ways. The first one is that you've already got loads of games you can play on it, but the other one is if you already have a PC, then maybe the Steam Deck isn't the one you want. If you have a PC but you don't have a Switch, then maybe it is worth branching out and to get that different console where you can play different games. If you're buying the Steam Deck and you already have a PC, a good gaming PC, then you're not really getting anything new out of that. You're just going to be able to play the same games on the Steam Deck as you could on your PC already. The next sort of quick fire point that I want to make is, do you care about playing on a TV right away? In theory, both of these devices can play on TV, but the Steam Deck doesn't come with a dock right out of the gate, whereas the Switch does come with a dock straight away, unless you're going for the Switch Lite, in which case you can't play on the TV at all. So if you're going for a Switch, again, it's sort of that ease of setting up and playing right away. You just plug the dock into the TV, you stick the Switch in the dock, and there you go, your game is on the TV. The Steam Deck, you're going to have to buy a dock separately. If you're buying the one from Valve, then it's another, I think it's £80 here in the UK, it's another cost. You can get other ones, third-party ones from like Amazon, things like that. So again, it's just that pick up and play nature that I think the Switch slightly beats out the Steam Deck with, and playing on TV as part of that. But I'd be really interested to see what you guys think. Do you prefer one of these devices over the other one? Like I said, I think they're sort of going for different audiences, and I don't think they're necessarily competing with each other. I have both. I regularly play both. At the moment, I'm playing things like Crisis Core on the Steam Deck, and at the same time, I'm playing Pokemon on the Switch. So, like I said, I use both. I just generally like handheld gaming, and that's why I'm drawn to both of these consoles. But I thought it would be fun to do this comparison video today. If you do prefer one or the other, let me know down in the comments. And similarly, if you think there's some important points that I've missed, just let me know down in the comments and everybody can have a read of those. If you enjoyed this video, then you might enjoy this video where I talk about my first impressions of the Steam Deck. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it useful, and I hope to see you in the next video.